So we're just going to have another reflection point here. Again, we're thinking about the big picture before we start shrinking down to writing and next step decisions. Here are 9 common problems that I'm hearing in feedback with hundreds and hundreds of schools outside of Bolton, all around the country, some international, but mainly based in England and Scotland. And I just want you to have 1 or 2 minutes and just hold up a kind of reflection point, a mirror to your school context. What are the issues that seem most salient in your school right now? And there might be interlinked issues. And where is our Word for All project addressing that, targeting that? So I'll stop talking and give you 2 minutes to think about where are those key challenges from this list. Okay, 30 seconds. It's 10 seconds. Okay, now if we come back, so some of these are challenges that when I'd kind of sourced information that they were the same 2 years ago: limited vocabulary, access to the curriculum, particularly for low prior attainers. But some of them are certainly more recent. So attendance impacting progress is one that is just shot up the list in terms of, well, if they're not in the classroom, then access to texts and then missing important gaps in the curriculum becomes much more important. Issues like writing stamina and handwriting and the ability to kind of write extended texts has become more of an issue in feedback to me. So I was speaking to a colleague, Caroline, who's in a primary school up in rural Northumberland, talking about, for a lot of her pupils, writing has been an issue coming back. They were able to support some home reading. And when pupils get back to the classroom, they were focusing on their well-being and their resilience and sustaining their kind of confidence in class. But then their writing needed to be supported. In other contexts, I've got a colleague who's a trust leader in London, and they were talking about writing sort of seeing the biggest gains, the quickest gains. So we have different contexts, different challenges, but probably some shared current issues as well. So this is where we're thinking, okay, big picture, lots of issues. Where do we taper and narrow down the focus? And that's where we can prioritize for the project and more. And we identify one, maximum kind of 2 or 3 areas that we want to target, burrow down more deeply. What practices would change in this area? So if it comes to attendance, that is a real, necessary factor in terms of all of this talk about rich access to language in the curriculum. So what are the couple of approaches to enhance attendance? And we don't just focus necessarily on what's happening in the classroom in the current state of our pupils and their issues. So what are current challenges that are subject specific? So here's another, again, reflection. So Lisa, you mentioned earlier about trying to make our work increasingly about disciplinary literacy. And that gets buy-in from our science teachers, our art teachers, but actually they need support. So what are those disciplinary challenges about reading and writing, and do teachers even notice that issue? Do they recognize the value of reading more in history beyond, the PowerPoint slides? And then we get specific. So in English, it might be about an issue about writing in full sentences and about grammar and accuracy and sentence building. And yet in science, the reality of that is that they might need to write in full sentences. And so that's a completely different type of writing. And for lots of our pupils, they often don't understand the difference. They don't see there's a difference. So they can write rough notes in English, just like they would in the lesson in science, and that not be something they recognize. Or as children move through Key Stage 2, they don't quite recognize the more formal, structured style if they're writing about a local case study, or if they're writing about history. So they're not quite recognizing the subject specificity. That's our job, to keep on helping them understand the language of school, that translation. And when I work with primary schools, we often just keep it really simple. You've got friendly language and formal language. And every time we write and talk, we think about doing those slight different moves for friendly writing, for friendly talk, and for formal writing and formal talk. But we need to make that explicit. Later on in our writing section, we'll look at the explicit moves of formal academic writing and how we can train pupils to do that well. And then you've got the likes of art. So pupils needing to have that specific language and vocabulary of art used in talk, used in dialogue and turn taking to describe our model, in teacher think alouds when we're doing a self-portrait or we're talking about a great artist, and also encouraging pupils to annotate their art specifically. So we'll look at some approaches to doing that later on. So actually, many teachers in art mightn't think there's an issue with writing or literacy in their subject, but the more we hold a mirror up to some of these moves in art around reading and writing and talking about art, then actually the more clear it becomes for our colleagues, and they will bring expertise to that as well. And then in maths, it might be, those multi-step word problems. So notice here, that problem's much smaller and shrunken down compared to attendance or reading complex texts across the curriculum, or whole class, whole school reading. So looking at a topic in algebra, looking at the wording of fraction questions and multi-step word problems, and giving pupils strategies and that explicit teaching of mathematical language. So this is where our challenges have subject-specific solutions. And for primary school colleagues, we recognise that in Key Stage 1 particularly, we just want pupils to develop language, to read and talk with confidence. But as you move through year 3 onwards, all the way up to year 13, it gets increasingly subject specific. And that needs to be more of our focus to help translate that curriculum challenge. And it can be really small. This doesn't have to be this really complex job and we're rewriting curriculum plans. We might just notice routinely that complex vocabulary. So Lydia, you made the point earlier that pupils are demanding more clarity around the academic vocabulary, the rich reading, and noticing words like decade and magnitude. So we might see those words in one subject and think about them in different ways. So if I just pose this question to you, what subject area, what subject specific language do you think they're from? Well, we might think mathematics. Decade, 10, and the root of dec we can unpick. Magnitude, it could be that point about kind of scale in mathematics, etc., and the root of mag. But then very easily, decade and magnitude could be history words, couldn't they? And about the meaning of these words in history. So decade reflects time, magnitude is about the significance, how important an event is in history. What is the magnitude of the peasants' revolt for English working class people, etc. So can be really small things that happen every day. It doesn't have to be big structured approaches to teaching differently, just seizing every opportunity. And that is Words for All. And I think one of the things is finding, going back to that just a minute single strategy, finding some golden threads just to weave through our current approach. Perhaps we do whole school Rosenshine's principles. Perhaps we've got, a big curriculum overhaul we've done and teachers feel a bit overwhelmed. How then can we just thread Words for All through the school day? supporting those pupils in targeted ways in different subject domains with different reading and writing challenges. So that's a question that I pose for you because you bring that expertise of your context and what's come before. And just a last idea before we have a quick break, where words for all could happen in every interaction. Again, in these small moves that make up so much of high quality teaching, but are often near invisible until we, kind of shine a close light on them. So how might words for all be visible and evident in language? So every time a teacher is talking and they're expanding on what people said and recasting it, changing it, making it more sophisticated. So we're elaborating, we're adding to our pupil responses. That is a great example of enhancing language and translating the curriculum and modeling the curriculum. Extending and explaining. Most pupils don't talk for an extended period in the school day. There's lots of listening, there's lots of quick, short questioning, answer interactions, but they often don't have that elaborate discussion that's necessary. So extending and explaining, finding opportunities like just a minute. Being really explicit, it could be verbally or in writing about that move from choosing a simple word to a sophisticated word. So in PE, using that word sweat and shifting it to perspiration, that constant recognition of the different tiers of vocabulary, the different styles of language we're using, that friendly to formal, those moves. Sharing synonyms like sweat to perspiration, modeling verbally those different word choices, writing them on the board, talking about different options for sentences in our writing, sentences to describe our art, sentences to describe Shakespeare's poetry. So thinking about synonyms all the time, translating and giving that rich academic language to our pupils. And then something really simple like scribing summary sentences. One of the things that we know really helps pupils read and understand complex text, it might be a chapter in a fiction book, it might be a page in a science textbook or a worksheet in geography, is writing single summary sentences. It seems so obvious and so easy, and yet lots of pupils don't do it well, and it needs scaffolding. So actually thinking carefully about how we model that and how we translate a verbal response into a written summary sentence on the board, and then we might echo and read that aloud. Again, modeling that move from friendly to formal, from simple to sophisticated. So words for all and this rich language doesn't have to be a product, a tool, a resource. It can be in every interaction we can muster, but that requires teacher support. That requires a real coordinated approach to doing this well, because it's hard. And often expert teachers do it without much conscious recognition. And one little move to make that easier is just being really explicit and narrowing it down, giving a simple prompt. So the can you prompt is one way of just constantly encouraging extended verbal responses. So, examples here, I won't patronize you, I'll just let you read them. Now, one of the realities here is you might think, okay, well, this is just, this is the stuff of teaching and learning. I know all of this, but then not just watching early career teachers, NQTs. Actually, when we observe practice, when we look at the words that are and the language experience in every classroom in our school, we'll constantly see the limited debate, limited discussions, lots of evidence about that limited language interaction. And this can be a simple move. The can you move is just a way of simplifying it for really busy teachers. They might have a prompt on their, on their board or whatever else. And it's really easy and simple. But often these simple, small changes to practice that accumulate to having the biggest differences. We'll often like something visible, like a knowledge organizer, a word list, a curriculum plan, a lovely river of our curriculum. But it's often in the small language moves, the small teaching of individual words and phrases and modeling it verbally and in writing that make the biggest difference over time. So let's be shrinking down our words for all into these simple approaches. And one recommendation I know it's a tricky time, particularly if you're in primary, given SATs week, but we've got a bit of a release. And in secondary schools, we're going to have the exam period coming up imminently. Thinking about where are those interactions happening in school? We reflected earlier about problems. We reflected earlier about what we've done so far in the project. Now, I'd recommend just an active listening to the classroom, listening to the language use. Are they word-rich classrooms? Is the reading and writing experience challenging, but at a Goldilocks level? Not too easy. They're not given scaffolds for every moving sentence or piece of writing, but they're actually given supports. And so struggling readers and writers can access this complex, sophisticated curriculum.